Good morning, everyone. Sorry for the delay in getting to this presentation. I've had some technical difficulties with Facebook Live. If you would like to ask any questions at any point in this discussion, please type it into the comments and I will try to respond as soon as possible. So this presentation is on unpacking the deeper realities behind mental health. I think you'll be able to access it after it's finished, and hopefully you'll find some benefit in it. All right, let's get started. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So first, I want to say that a lot of mental health and health in general rests on healthy activation of your entire being, body, mind, soul. And so by talking about what that healthy activation looks like, we can begin to understand how mental health comes into play. So, in the Quran, Allah says, kun fayakun, be and it is. And so it's important to understand that this activation in the deepest way begins from that unseen world and not in the world of appearances, not in the phenomenal world, that there are deeper realities behind everything that we're looking at. And even in that phenomenal world are realities, things unseen to the naked eye that are just part of that physical world, which I will elaborate on. So this health, mental health, is not just in your mind. It is intimately intertwined, body, mind, and soul. So when we're trying to understand what's going on with anyone, it's important to know that to make an assessment that's thorough, that's holistic, that takes into account all the factors in health. So I want to begin unpacking that a bit for you. The general causes, if we look at health energetically, the general causes can be attributed to deficiency, some kind of deficiency that is generated in some way, whether it's nutritional, whether it's spiritual, and that deficiency leads to a stagnation in the body that is energetic and then becomes physical. At the same time, if there's some kind of blockage in the body that causes stagnation, it then eventually leads to deficiency simply because your resources are not being accessed. So somewhere in the body, there will be an excess, an accumulation around the stagnation, and everywhere downstream, there will be a deficiency. And then, of course, there are pathogens. Toxins of all varieties, pathogens which are, microbes, as well as substances. And this leads to stagnation and or deficiency. So I will elaborate on what that looks like. So very simply, mental disturbance, mental imbalance can in fact be caused by mechanical issues. So we know that people in pain can start to come undone. So any kind of impingement of a nerve, any kind of strain on your nervous system, and people can start to come undone. So when you evaluate someone, part of that evaluation should include a musculoskeletal evaluation. And the most central piece of that is evaluating the health of the spinal cord. And a lot of practice, a lot of physical body-mind exercises are target the spinal cord specifically to restore the mobility, the suppleness of that spinal cord. And if you look at the different spiritual traditions of the world, they almost all include core practices that maintain the health of the spine. Some kind of bowing, bending, prostrating, and so on that maintains the health of the spine. And often it's a central focus of the spiritual practices of these traditions. A central focus of the physical component of the spiritual practices. Another cause of mental imbalance disturbance is taxation, and what in the health world today is discussed under the term adrenal fatigue. This taxation can be caused by a challenging environment. You're being overwhelmed in the spring and the summer, let's say, by the seeding of nature, all of the pollen that is, ejected into the atmosphere, and that can be overwhelming for some people. If you are a deficient or compromised person, that will be much more impactful than if you are healthy. The other is, of course, if your water quality is poor. So if you're getting a lot of poisons in your water, which today is a real issue, where you have everything from the contaminants that are used to clean water, as well as all the things that people dump into their toilets and their sinks, including medication. So you could, in fact, be getting, you could be dosed by people's psychiatric meds in your water supply. And obviously that's not as potent as if you're taking the pill directly, but it is a factor. In an ideal situation, we would all have a well with a really great filtration system, and you wouldn't be dealing with, what the city water system unfortunately brings. So we want to ensure great water and air quality as much as possible. So those are major factors. So we know that people that live in industrial zones are getting exposed to all kinds of atmospheric pollutants. There's a field of medicine today called geographic medicine, and it's now understood that when you do an intake, you want to see, where has your patient been living for the last 10 years or more, or going further back. When you're tracking a person's health, especially when it seems to be where their problems are eluding you, you want to see where has this person lived, to track all the places since, even since birth possibly. Because it could in fact be that a chronic illness really began when they moved to an industrial zone or a place with very poor air quality. All right, so another cause of taxation, of course, is work, especially anyone that is doing hard labor or working in any kind of toxic or very stressful work environment. Working for survival. These are all ways in which we can go into adrenal fatigue. Pregnancy is also, a source of taxation, especially subsequent pregnancies. So you may have done well with the first pregnancy, and maybe it's the second or third or beyond that really then took a chunk out of you. So if you were deficient from the beginning, then your first pregnancy would be difficult. And in many cases, that kind of person would be dealing with miscarriages. The body needs a certain amount of vitality and a certain critical mass of fat in order to simply hold a fertilized egg. Otherwise, if you don't have it, your body will actually abort the embryo because it knows that it cannot sustain it. And in traditional systems of medicine, one of our major concerns is to ensure that mothers postpartum are really supported and deeply nourished to recover all of that vitality that was sucked out of you during the pregnancy. So in traditional societies, you wouldn't return to work immediately. You would be given very nourishing soups. You would have various treatment modalities that involve heating and nourishing the body applied to you for many months before you would, engage in any kind of work. And of course, this is a major topic of conversation in Western society today, is how well are mothers supported? Are they given, maternal leave so that they are able to, really take the time to recover and spend time with their babies before returning into the workforce? And then, of course, trauma can tax you quite powerfully and immediately. And chronic low-grade stress, however, can also drain you over time. And this is one of the things that is often overlooked, is that ever-present strain that is not so loud, that easily goes unnoticed, but over time starts to really take its toll on you. All right, so those are just some examples of the kinds of taxation that can destabilize you, your mental health. All right, moving on to the poisons, which I briefly mentioned, which is another thing that can really take the life out of you, compromise you, where you begin to come undone mentally. Poisons basically are, in so many ways, killing the body, and different kinds of poisons simulate different mental health states. So, for example, people that are exposed to black mold, if you have black mold in your home or in your workplace, anywhere where you are spending significant amount of time, that black mold, if it reaches a certain mass and you're basically breathing in neurotoxins, people often go into a kind of profound despair where they just want to die. And I've seen this several times with different patients. And this is why when black mold reaches a certain critical mass, buildings are often condemned. They literally the walls have to be gutted. So mold, fungus, chemical poisoning, anything that you breathe in goes into your bloodstream very quickly. Anything that comes into contact with your skin also enters the body much faster than, let's say, if you ingest it. So this is something to be careful about when you're working with any kind of household products, chemical products. You want to probably wear gloves. Open the windows if you're using things indoors. Be very careful about the container holding these things, because some of these chemicals can eat right through certain kinds of plastic, cheap plastic. You want to have your ventilation system on to be moving the air out. With very dangerous chemicals, you probably maybe even want to wear a mask. If you're doing any kind of dusting, it's wise to actually wear a mask. And for a very small amount, for less than $1, you can buy masks that are even surgical grade that have a microbial filter. Because, of course, on dust, you have microorganisms that are, growing and living. So it's wise that when you do any kind of dusting, especially of books, your bookcase, that you put on a mask. You will notice that when working with chemicals, your sinuses may actually be burned from simply breathing in the chemical vapors. So this is something to be very careful of. And I actually recommend phasing out all conventional chemical household products and using natural products. And you can actually make your own, countertop, and tile cleaners and dish liquid out of, apple cider vinegar and water. And there are recipes that you can find online quite easily that are natural and safe and effective. All right. So another kind of poison that we're bombarded by today is electromagnetic. So many of you may have had the experience of flying, and especially on long flights, where you feel sort of, how can I describe it? Like fuzzy, whacked out. You feel a bit discombobulated. When an airplane engine is rotating, it's sending out powerful electromagnetic waves. So some of you may remember back in the days of television sets that had the dog ear antenna, that if you turned on a vacuum cleaner, these static waves would appear on the television screen that were basically being picked up by the antennae of your television sets. So when you turn on a vacuum cleaner, which is a very small motor, it's actually sending out electromagnetic waves all around you, even that tiny little vacuum cleaner motor. And those electromagnetic waves are passing right through you, and they're being picked up by the various, metal objects in the home. And of course, your television set actually registers those waves and functions as an oscilloscope. And so you're actually seeing it. Now imagine an airplane engine and the powerful electromagnetic waves being sent through you from that engine, passing through the body of all the people on that airplane. And what happens if you're on a long flight? And what happens if you are a frequent flyer? So those electromagnetic waves are not benign, and they're not doing nothing. There is some impact, and your body is powerfully impacted by fields of energy. And this is something that modern medicine doesn't fully understand yet, but we do understand enough to know that the diagnostic devices of modern medicine, everything from CT scans and PET scans and X-rays, we know that they actually have an impact on the body that is significant, concerning, and a certain amount of exposure can actually generate illness. So we know that a certain percentage of people receiving a thoracic CT scan will actually develop cancer from the scan itself. And so physicists understand, they are the ones who've designed these devices, and they better than anyone else can probably tell us what's going on an atomic level in the body. But needless to say, it's something to be concerned about. That's why I tell people, never talk on your cell phone with the cell phone up to your head for more than a few minutes. Don't get into the habit of speaking on the cell phone for an hour or more, holding it up to your head. And if you have any doubts about the impact, you can ask anyone. People develop chronic headaches and migraines from extended cell phone use, right up to the head. And right after you take the phone off, you'll notice that there's a low-grade inflammation on that side of the face. And also, you don't want to keep your cell phone in the shirt pocket in your chest, because the transmitter in cell phones is very strong, especially in Apple devices. And your body, especially your heart, has electrical mechanisms. And those mechanisms are impacted by electromagnetic waves. So it's something to take seriously. So there are people, I've treated people who have in fact developed heart palpitations and heart flutters from storing their cell phones on their chest. So be careful of that. So where do you keep it? Well, keep it in a bag, keep it in a pant pocket or something. All right. So anything that causes you to come undone, to be destabilized, imbalanced, frazzled, energetically, emotionally, physically, is going to translate into some kind of mental effect. And and it has to be taken on a case-by-case basis. So some of you may be asking, well, how much of an exposure is too much? It depends on multiple factors: your age, your vitality, your overall state of health. The more compromised you are energetically, emotionally, mentally, the more susceptible you will be to these influences. So if you're having a really bad year, you probably will have noticed that things that previously did not bother you, from difficult interactions with people to foods that you're slightly sensitive to, are much more impactful than when you were in a state of general health and balance. So everything has to be taken on a case-by-case basis. And on any given year, the straw that breaks the camel's back, will vary depending on where you are, in your overall state of health. So when I see people, I ask them, really basic questions like, what was going on in your life at the time that your illness manifested? And often there is a component of some major stressor, whether it was traveling to a foreign country, getting vaccinations, or a transatlantic flight, or a death in the family, or moving into a brand new house that is outgassing a lot of chemicals from the paint and the carpeting. But there's usually some major event that is a contributor or quite causative, that predicts the illness that the person has. All right, so that was number 3, poisons. Now, the 4th category is nutrition. So, of course, poor nutrition is a major factor in, food medicine is some of the most important medicine in life. Because it's constant. So if your food isn't right, then we know that you're not going to be healthy. When we're looking at food, we want to assess whether you're getting adequate nutrition, but we also want to see if you're actually able to assimilate nutrition in the first place. We live in a time where guts are compromised on a massive scale. So people that are eating well are actually not able to assimilate the nutrition they're getting because of a compromised gut. What that means practically is that your body will not be in a state of optimal functioning, because all of those processes that are supplemented by amino acids, enzymes, proteins, all the raw materials of physical functioning, those functions will not be primed if you're not getting what you need. So there are lots of people eating great food, but they are in fact unable to assimilate it because of either possibly a genetic, a missing genetic link, that your body cannot create what it needs to, let's say, digest a particular mineral or to assimilate a particular vitamin, or that your gut has been compromised because it was exposed, let's say, to an antibiotic, or some kind of poison in your food. And our food is full of poisons today, unfortunately. So a big culprit is glyphosate, which is a chemical found in Roundup, which is a product produced by Monsanto. And Roundup is used as a weed killer. It's a very effective weed killer, but of course the problem is that as soon as it gets into your food and you're ingesting it, then you have a problem on your hands. So if you're in the habit of eating cheap food, GMO foods, non-organic foods, and that makes up the bulk of your diet, then there's a good chance you're getting a lot of poisons in your system that would compromise your gut. Naturally, of course, any kind of food allergy that you have, if you're in the habit of eating foods that your body simply cannot process, even if those foods are in their best form, in season, organic, and so on, then your gut will be compromised. And what does that mean? When your gut is compromised, the lining is inflamed and it is unable to absorb the good nutrients that you need. And it's also permeable to the poisons that your body would ordinarily efficiently siphon out of your body and excrete. And actually those poisons are getting into your bloodstream and getting into your cells, and then compromising cellular function, tissue function, and therefore organ function and system function. And this is when you'll start to see some real chronic illness emerging. All right. So number 5, light. Light is, people often don't think about the critical role that light plays in health. We understand it in a very simple way. People know about seasonal affective disorder, for example, where people that do not get enough sunlight begin to become emotionally, mentally, physically depressed. But the same also holds true on the other side, which is if you have too much light, you can actually become depressed from not having sufficient interior darkness, daily retreat time. It is essential for all of us on a daily and annual basis to be able to retreat within ourselves into the deep, dark interior. In order to be spiritually, energetically, and physically rejuvenated, just like bears hibernate annually, we need to do that on a daily basis. If you live in a place with a lot of light and you're not in the habit of going into a dark place, closing the blinds when you sleep, and making sure that your space is physically dark when you try to rest, then you may actually develop a kind of seasonal affective disorder. So light is very important also in assimilating, in creating certain vitamins, but if you look at light, looking a little deeper in a way that's often not discussed, when light touches your body, it's actually going into your, to some degree, it's going into your tissues, it's going into the fluid body, and it's doing something. And again, modern medicine does not talk much about this, does not understand it very well, but it is really quite essential. And there's a profound spiritual component here, that through the pineal gland in the brain, which has photoreceptors for detecting light, right? This is why the pineal gland is called the third eye. It actually has photoreceptors and a lens to focus light, cosmic light. And we understand in modern medicine today that it is essential in keeping your circadian rhythms, so that if you do something kind of unnatural by flying 1,000 miles across the planet, that your circadian rhythms are discombobulated, and it's important to get back on track so that you can synchronize with your environment. So that pineal gland plays, is the key player in maintaining your circadian rhythms. But those cosmic lights, which are coming from God knows where, well, the cosmos, but different types of cosmic lights that you will find very few people talking about, that are coming from the solar system, but also the Milky Way, and then the massive, galaxies of the universe. We are on some level impacted by these energies, and they and your pineal gland and your overall, neurological health plays a role in that. So what activates the pineal gland is actually spiritual practice. So people that do meditation and pray are getting a regular tune-up of the entire endocrine system, but especially those glands of the brain, the pineal gland, the pituitary, and this is why spiritual practice is so essential. The deepest and most essential and profound activation of the human being is through the subtle psychic centers that each correspond to an endocrine gland. The most important ones being basically from the chest up. So if you are not engaged in some kind of body-mind practice that basically boils down to prayer, invocation, meditation, then you're not activating those glands to be able to tune into the cosmos and effectively line up with those energies. So this is probably the most essential component in mental health, is the spiritual dimension. And I will elaborate on that in some points that we're building up to. So light. Number 6 is, of course, your genetics. If your stress genes are activated, then the illnesses that they begin to generate, you have the possibility of developing certain illnesses. All of us do, especially when your stress genes are activated. When you do body-mind practices that establish balance and grounding and centering and bring you into a state of homeodynamic equilibrium, those stress genes are deactivated. However, when you're triggered, they may be activated. And activation means the beginning of, a situation you want to avoid. So we all have those genes, and living a good life basically makes sure that they stay quiet. That being said, most everyone has genes that are essential for vital functions, and most of us have gaps in certain chains. And those, ideally, we would all get a genetic panel when we're born to show us the missing links we have in these chains, so that then you can live skillfully. You can supplement those missing links so that the chain is effectively completed and a process is available to you in order to create certain micronutrients, but also in order to process things that you were exposed to in food and in the environment. But it might also be that there are certain chains that are missing so many links that what you in fact need to do is avoid things entirely. So this is the situation where you have deadly allergies. That poor person who, when they even come near a peanut, they go into respiratory distress, and they need to, quickly apply an EpiPen. And that's a situation that, there's not much you can do with that except just be prepared. But in most cases, we're all dealing with sensitivities to certain environmental factors, especially foods, and we need to either minimize or avoid those foods. That being said, people often get allergy tests and that seem to show that they're allergic to everything. But in reality, what's going on is that we are exposed to so many poor varieties of food that we think that the tests show that you're allergic to corn and soy and wheat and all of these things, but in fact, we are reacting to very poor versions of these foods. and we are not fundamentally allergic to these foods because, you know, you go to another country where they don't have all the genetically modified foods, and low quality versions of these foods, and you eat them because, well, you're on vacation and you say, well, I think I'll just eat this now and give myself a break, and you have no reaction to those foods. So naturally, if you're in a compromised state, you will be sensitive to things that you would otherwise be fine with. And what would happen if you consumed very clean foods? Would you be as sensitive as you are today to those things that you are aware of? And the answer is probably not. You would probably be just fine. All right, so let's move on here. I do recommend a thorough nutritional evaluation with, you know, an integrative nutritionist to uncover, you know, these kinds of things. At the end of the day, that's something we should all have done or be doing so that we know exactly how to eat moving forward in life to minimize the kinds of problems that you could encounter. Number 7, absence of a social network. In 1979, there was a study done where they released, you know, a rat into a maze, and they wanted to see, you know, if this rat is given water with morphine or just plain water, what will it choose? And they found that the rat consistently chose, you know, the high experience by drinking the water that was dosed. And what's very interesting is very recently, someone repeated this experiment with a sense that the whole framework of the experiment was flawed. This time, an additional group was included where that wasn't just a single rat released into the maze, but in fact, several rats. And they found that when the rat was not alone, it consistently drank the water that was not drugged. And the idea here, the conclusion is that when you have a social network, when you have a social support system, that you that is perhaps one of the greatest predictors of health. Oops, we have a little message here. Right, so if anyone has any questions, please feel free to write your questions in the comment section, and I will try to answer. So the conclusion was that, right, if you have a social network, this is one of the critical elements in health. And we see wherever people are lacking community, you have pathology emerge. We know that all of these characters behind these mass killings in schools and other places were basically disturbed people. And the one of the most obvious things when I see these, you know, the reports about these individuals is that they basically didn't have a social network that was healthy. And you know, so it's said that the smallest unit of health is the community, and actually not the individual. So if you do not have a healthy community, how could you possibly be healthy, even if you exercise and eat the best food in the world? It's very difficult. It's very difficult because loneliness can really eat at the soul. And so I encourage all of you to really cultivate your friendships and to prioritize that, to really build your community. And this is an issue for spiritual people who are so often exposed to, you know, a substantial amount of dysfunction in spiritual communities and other communities. And their response is to simply withdraw. especially people who are sensitive. And spiritual people are generally sensitive. And what I mean by that is they're thoughtful, considerate, concerned people. And when they see ugliness, there's a natural tendency to withdraw from that. But sometimes that means going into isolation rather than building your spiritual friends network and investing in that, and meeting once a year with those friends for a friend's retreat or a friend's pilgrimage, having a monthly meal, a potluck where you spend time in spiritual conversation and you really nourish your souls. This is very important. So the absence of a social network is a big factor in mental health. Number 8, lack of physical touch. This is something that is appreciated today, but is still maybe under discussed. You may live in a large family, but if people do not hug each other, sit next to each other, touch each other, hold hands, you are not being stimulated, right? So I opened this whole conversation to emphasize that one of the most therapeutic principles in health is stimulation. Are you getting that stimulation through touch, through light, through foods with vitality, through conversation, time with friends? The soul, the entire body, mind, soul unit needs that stimulation, and it needs to be multidimensional. If you eat great food, but you have no sunlight and no spiritual time with friends, then that food will probably not be enough. All right, so physical touch. So a wonderful thing to learn in life is, to just take a weekend course in massage therapy, even, without any designs to become a massage therapist or anything. When you take a weekend course in massage therapy, you can begin to appreciate the power of touch for human beings, in relationships, and it's something you can give to your family, and it's something, and it will also make you comfortable with touch. If you find that you are not comfortable with touch, then it means that there's a certain amount of lack of integration there that you should deal with. Because if you're not comfortable with touch, there's a story behind that should be addressed. I'm not going to go into that too deeply right now, but just know that it's a red flag. It implies that you're not as healthy as you could be, and that there is something wonderful waiting for you on the other end when you experience a breakthrough. Number 9, soul blocks. So the major categories of soul level disturbance are existential and ancestral. Existential disturbance, what would that look like? So to the extent that you are not in touch with who you really are, where you come from, and what you are doing on a deeper level, what are you doing in this life, in this world, and what you were sent to do. To the extent that you're not consciously attuned to any of these factors, you will have existential issues. And this is one of perhaps the most gripping things that could lead to you coming undone. Right? Lacking purpose, not knowing who you are, walking through life aimlessly, and basically floundering. So those fundamental questions of existence and being should really be addressed. Who am I? Where do I come from? What am I doing? Where am I going? All right, yes. So if those are not in place, then you're just not going to be right. You're not going to have alignment, and you're not going to have integration. The other soul level disturbance major category here are ancestral disturbances. So if there's any kind of noise in your ancestral line, which, in case you're wondering, is pretty much all of us, because every ancestral line has had its troubles. You only need to turn on the television and watch the news to see how pervasive this is. So this is where it really behooves us to know where we came from, to know who our ancestors are and the struggles that they had. And if you do a simple historical analysis, you basically know where your family came from, and you study a little bit of history, you can see the major historical and geographic stress events of the past that probably likely impacted your family. And there's a chance that they went into some kind of suffering around it. But if there's any doubt, the easy way to identify ancestral disturbances is in this way. It's basically what you have chronically struggled with your entire life since you were born, because it is what you inherited. And this is something you want to unpack and really study and bring attention to. So, of course, we know, for example, that displaced people, the Africans brought to this continent in, enslaved, our Native American family here in the Americas, and so many other peoples who have been traumatized, displaced, have been through, genocides and so on, are carrying heavy ancestral suffering. And this is something that requires very particular attention, and usually from practitioners who are spiritual and are able to read these pathologies and bring that deeper medicine. But anyway, to recap, it causes a real disturbance in the soul that manifests physically. So if you throw pharmaceuticals at these people, it's not going to heal them. That there's a deeper soul level heart conversation that needs to take place, and doing work around that suffering. All right, the final category, number 10, I want to mention here. And by the way, these categories are not at all exhaustive. There are more that we could probably come up with, but these are the major ones. So the often overlooked one outside of spiritual circles and in the world of modern medicine are psychic disturbances that are the result of a spectrum of influences, everything from negative vibes in your relationships where someone is upset with you or jealous, which is basically flying around, the atmosphere everywhere most of the time. That at any given moment there is a little psychic disturbance in a relationship because that relationship is not entirely smooth in your life. To the other end of the spectrum, which is black magic, where people are consciously, intentionally after you for whatever reason, because they just don't like you, or they are deeply jealous of you, and rather than attending to their own lives and fixing their own problems, they make a career out of undermining your life so that you can't enjoy your life, and in a twisted way, thinking that if you suffer, you'll appreciate what they're going through. But unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. So in the world of spirituality, when people go to clerics, imams, and so on, to get answers for their life problems, whether those problems are physical or relationship issues or career difficulty, there is a tendency to blame everything on psychic forces, when in fact, sometimes it can be any of the previous 9 things that I mentioned. something as simple as poisoning from mold or fungus or something in your water or your food could easily undo your mental stability. So in the spiritual world, there's a tendency, unfortunately, to just blame everything on spiritual forces. And in the world of physical medicine, there's a tendency to blame everything on physical concerns, and to basically overlook and often even simply dismiss the spiritual forces. And again, when you are trying to understand what's going on, it's critical to do a holistic evaluation where you ask every kind of question to assess the health of any department in a person's life. I ask about everything. Who are you? Where do you come from? Where do you live right now? What do you do for a living? What are you studying? How is your diet? Do you have friends? How are your relationships? Did you just move into a brand new house? What kinds of household products do you use? Do you live near, do you live in an industrial zone? So I actually look up people's addresses to see where they live. Do they live near a coal plant? Do they live near a power station? Do they live in a geographic bubble that has very poor air circulation? So I'm painting a complete picture of each person and what they're dealing with, so as to really understand all the potential influences that could be contributing to that person's distress. So often people think that they can leave out all kinds of details because they are irrelevant. But in fact, everything is potentially relevant. So if someone just had a breakup, they may perceive that question as intrusive and too personal, but it in fact could be a primary cause of their physical collapse. If your heart is breaking, you can be sure that your body will be showing signs of that distress. And that's why, of course, the highest medicine is spiritual medicine, which begins really with knowledge. Knowing how to think correctly about your life, which includes yourself, other specific people in your life, and your sense of life and humanity in general. Do you have a positive outlook? One of the signs of health is that a person has a generally positive outlook about themselves, life, and the world. And if you find that you are in a chronic state of negativity, I would encourage you to attend to that as soon as possible, because it is creating a spiral that will really suck you into an abyss, and you will get physically ill at some point. The soul is the master of the body. If the soul isn't right, it doesn't matter how much you take care of your body, it will not be entirely healthy. If the soul is right, however, you won't have to break your back to be a healthy person. Going out of your way to extremes, to take care of the physical body. It's really a miracle that we survive any given moment, because there are so many things in your immediate environment that could easily put you in the hospital. There are any number of microorganisms in your own physical body that are essential for processes that, if it ends up in another part of your body where they're not supposed to live, could put you in the hospital. A simple example is E. coli, a bacteria which is essential for certain processes in the gut. If it ends up in your mouth, it could make you quite ill. So it's really a miracle. This is another one of the proofs of God, is that we survive the present moment. Any scientist, anyone who understands, anything about pathogens knows that it's quite extraordinary that we aren't getting sick all the time everywhere we go, because on every doorknob on the planet is an entire, ecosystem of microbes that could cause a problem with you. But why does hardly anyone get sick from holding a door handle? Well, because you have an immune system, because you have so many other, really miraculous things keeping you alive. All right, so those are the 10 points. I think, inshallah, you'll be able to access this presentation afterwards and watch it from the beginning. I will say a few last things. We, of course, need to understand community health as one of the key factors in personal health. That if there's no social network, if there's no healthy community, that in fact it's very difficult to be a healthy person, because we all need that. We exist in a spiritual psychic web of being. So if your community is not healthy and you think you're healthy, you're probably fooling yourself. Because one of the signs of health is the capacity to feel what other people are going through and to handle it. And people that aren't really healthy can't handle it. They cannot feel what other people are going through. They have no tolerance for the news, because as soon as they watch the news and they see enough of the bad things happening to, poor people on the planet, they can't stand it. They can't bear witness to it. It is a good practice to take the time to watch a little bit of news, to know what the rest of the world is going through, and to pray into that suffering, asking for intercession, asking for the divine to intercede on behalf of these people suffering around the world, of which there are too many in our day and age. And to allow yourself to feel what they're going through so that you can really appreciate the condition of the world today. And so you can expand your capacity for tolerance and experience, and you can begin to spiritually mature. If you can't stand to see anything, from time to time, yes, of course, it's good to take a break. But if you really can't stand to witness anything at all, then it means there's some work to do, and it's okay, because that's a big part of why we're here on this planet in this lifetime. But just know for yourself that that is something that needs to happen, and don't have any illusions about that. And as much as possible, be a change maker, or at least a support in your own immediate community, fostering, nurturing, cultivating health and well-being and goodness. Do something to help other people. It doesn't have to be, every second of the day, but on a weekly basis, it will be profoundly nourishing for your heart and soul to do something. Go work in a shelter serving, food to homeless people. Make survival packs for homeless people that you keep in your car, so that every time you see someone, you have something to offer. Looks like we have a question here. Okay, so I'll respond to this in one moment. So it's really important that we create safe spaces in our communities, and you would expect spiritual communities to be these safe spaces, but unfortunately in many cases they are not. We do have an interesting group of people in spiritual communities that are like predators, that prey upon the light, especially of converts and young people, or spiritually young people who are very radiant because they are still in touch with the ideals of existence and they have a real pure outlook. And the predators in these communities literally go and feed on that light, and they begin to try to control those people. So you have like your own private little battery, supplying you with energy. And this is not good, and it's not healthy. So our communities need to be safe spaces, and we want to monitor and ensure that the guests, visitors, and the younger members of those communities are well cared for, supported, and protected. And especially anyone who shows up, who is struggling, who is suffering in any way whatsoever, is not marginalized, shamed, silenced. Too often, what we're actually dealing with is people are afraid to feel. And one of the things we find in spiritual communities is something called spiritual bypassing. People that are too afraid to feel and to take the time to listen and be present to the suffering of other people, their knee-jerk response is to shut it down. So as soon as the suffering person begins to share something or begins to manifest their difficulty, the spiritual bypassers will use, language, stories, to shut it down, rather than being quiet, listening, holding space for that suffering person, taking the time to really understand what they're going through, and directing them to the people and the resources who can help and make a difference. And in any community where there is an ego problem, the so-called leaders may be really uncomfortable outsourcing their congregation to the appropriate support, systems and professionals, because they're afraid that it doesn't look good for them, right? That they, as the leader, should be able to handle everything. So often what happens is they dismiss the suffering of those people. They silence them, they shut them down, and even worse, they shame them for having any kind of problem in the first place. So every community would actually do well to have on hand resources that can be immediately engaged when those people present. And most communities actually have therapists that are part of the congregation, professionals, healers, physicians, social workers, and it's good to know who those people are and to support them in performing their, bringing their expertise to the community. So once a month or every few months, it's a wonderful thing to allow those people to give a presentation, to have, let's say, a clinic, to avail the community to those resources, and to, in the least, to be able to inform the community that these people exist, they are here, and they can help you if you need help. That whenever help is needed, those resources are available. So this is something that in our, in the Muslim community in America, seems to actually be coming into place, but there's still a lot of work to do. And I feel good about what's happening, that there seems to be a critical consciousness where smart, capable people who are now of age and present in these communities are being given the microphone and the opportunity to share their expertise. Nevertheless, not every circle is perfect, and there's still, work to be done. All right, so that's all I wanted to share. I will now answer this question, which is here. Thank you, Neda, for the question. Would you mind elaborating on how to, quote, tend to that, unquote, turn around the negative thoughts and negative outlook? So in the world of pop psychology, this is often dealt with in a very quick and superficial way, where in fact you could say it is the life work of every soul to identify your chronic negative narratives that are not the spiritual truths that we are trying to embody. You want to identify those narratives, unpack them completely, and ask the divine to support you in illumination, to receive spiritual insight on those very precise points. So it may take a little time to do that. Many people actually need help in doing that. A portion of it you can probably do yourself based on what I just said, but most people actually need help, and it takes a bit of time because the most difficult, the most pernicious negative themes that cause your heart, your soul to unravel and for you to sort of be mentally destabilized, those narratives are in your unconscious, subconscious layers. And without spiritual support and very precise spiritual support, you won't actually access them. And often when you do, most people go into a state of confusion and their ability to effectively turn them around is compromised. So in this case, you really want help. And this is work, this is some of my favorite work to do with people, because it really gets to the heart of what really matters in life. So if any of you, please feel free to reach out at any time. I'm glad to help in any way that I can, whether it's on an individual basis or if there's a need in your community and you would like me to come and give a presentation or something more substantial in the form of a weekend workshop, or something even longer like a 4 or 5 day retreat where we can do a deep, piece of work, or you would just like a one-on-one session, I'm glad to help. I'm at your disposal. So if anyone has any questions, please go ahead and type it in because we're about ready to wrap it up here. I want to thank those of you who've joined and those of you who will join in the future and just watch this. I hope it was beneficial and not too overwhelming. To hear all of these things, sometimes the thought might arise that, wow, how am I going to do this? It's, how can I survive this life? It's more complicated than I thought. But know that the divine is, ever present in helping you, your family, your community, the world, and that it is in fact Allah who is the greatest refuge. And I encourage all of you to seek refuge in that divine reality first and foremost, and not to simply rely on yourselves, on your own intelligence, on your own skills, all of which are waxing and waning at any given moment. And the general trajectory with aging, of course, is down. Physically, that is. But hopefully we are all spiritually climbing with your sincere efforts, inshallah. And you will spiritually become, have a softer, purer heart and become more spiritually luminous so that you can really be a beacon of light in your communities. So thank you again. And I want to thank all those forces, seen and unseen, holding a space for us in this discussion. Alhamdulillah. Have a beautiful day and a beautiful week. And if there is interest, then perhaps we can continue this conversation with future presentations. And hopefully, I look forward to meeting some of you someday. Take care. Ma salama.